If you click play on today's episode thinking it's all about horses, well, you're right, but you're also totally mistaken. And that's because today's guest, Tik Maynard, two-time World to the Horse champion, is here to talk to us about way more than just horses. He's here to give us his story. And in that story, a lesson in what it's like to chase after your dreams, to go after the things that you believe in, even if they might be a little bit different than how everybody else is doing it. So even if you've never ridden a horse, been around a horse, consider yourself to be a horse person, my friend, today's interview is something that is going to transform your life. Because honestly, when you boil it down, Tik's story today, what it's about really waking up to who you really and truly are, and ultimately finding the courage to step into it, even when the stakes are high. So my friend, I encourage you to get ready, to lean in, to get excited, because today's episode is going to move you. This is episode 404 of Grit, Grace, and Inspiration. I'm your host, Kevin Lowe. And of course, as always, I am absolutely stoked that you are here today. Now, as one little extra bonus, in case today's episode isn't enough, well, I want you to check out the link at the top of today's show notes where you can hear this entire story shrunk down into just a song. Yeah, a custom country song that tells the story of Tik Maynard. It's called The Horseman's Dance and is ready for you to listen right now. So I encourage you, first, listen to the interview, but then be sure to check out the song for a little extra something, just to be sure that you get enough of Tik Maynard in your life. Why not have it as a song as well?
Yeah, I got grit, grace, and inspiration on my mind.
What is going on? And welcome back to Grit, Grace, and Inspiration. I'm your host, Kevin Lowe. Today, I have the pleasure of being in the studio with none other than the infamous Mr. Tik Maynard. Tik, man, what a pleasure to have you here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Kevin. It is an honor and a privilege and a pleasure to be here chatting with you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, Tik, I'm excited to get to dive into your story, but, I always say, obviously a story starts at the beginning. And the question that I would love to start off with is, what is your first memory kind of revolve around in regards to horses? I guess I'm just kind of curious to understand where horses entered the picture for you.
Yeah, a lot of, in the horse world, there's a lot of kids that didn't grow up around horses. And you can see that passion in kids sometimes as young as 3 or 4 years old, where they want to have a stuffed animal horse. They want to go pet horses. They want to go on pony rides. They want to wear horse t-shirts or pony t-shirts or unicorn t-shirts. But for a few of us, like myself and like some other people out there, we grew up around horses. And I don't even really remember the process of learning to ride. It was just, we always had horses in the backyard. My parents rode, my brothers rode, all our neighbors rode. And it was just part of sort of the lifestyle and the culture that we had growing up. Maybe similar to the way that some people, it's what their family does. Maybe they play baseball together or go to church together. And so I was lucky enough to grow up in that environment.
Yeah. Now, whereabouts did you grow up at?
I grew up in a really unique area when it comes to horses. Mostly horses are in quite rural settings, wide open spaces. We think of Texas or Montana or Colorado. We don't usually think of major cities. And I actually grew up in the city of Vancouver in Canada. And there's this very small pocket, maybe about a square mile, that is zoned in a way that owners are allowed to have horses right within the city limits of Vancouver. And it's a very unique thing. I've never heard of that in any other, North American city that I've heard of. So the lot sizes were not, by a horse standard, the lot sizes were not very big. They were sort of anywhere from 1 acre to maybe 3 acres. According to the city standards, where the lots are usually like a quarter acre, they were quite big. But, compared to a rural setting where farms and horses usually live, they were quite small. And so a lot of our neighbors had horses, but there was a riding club called Southlands Riding Club. And so everybody that had horses, they joined the riding club, and we would lead our horses or ride our horses along the streets and along sort of the sidewalks. And there were ditches on either side of the street with little fish or minnows or ducks or great blue herons in them. And we would ride along the road anywhere, depending on where you lived, anywhere from a quarter mile to the full length of that area, Southlands, that's owned agriculturally. And we would ride over to the riding club. Everybody that rode in that area, we all got to know each other, and we all kind of shared space, and we were all members of that club. It was a pretty unique way to grow up around horses.
That's fascinating. Now, the riding club, what would you do at the club? Like, what was the I guess the point of being part of the club?
So, first of all, for the people that don't have a horse background that are listening to this, Kevin, that we have to understand that in the horse world, there's a lot of different disciplines. There's the English sports, the Olympic sports of dressage, show jumping, and 3-day eventing. And then you have the Western sports like reining and cutting. And then there's also a lot of other sort of disciplines, anything from thoroughbred racing to polo to endurance riding to mounted archery or mounted shooting to competitive trail riding to working equitation. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there's over 100 different horse sports in existence. And this riding club mainly catered to English riders, which means show jumping, dressage, and eventing. And so there was, 6 or 7 different arenas. There was a grass field we could ride in. There was a half-mile track to ride around. When it was raining, there was an indoor arena and also a covered arena, which essentially means it has a roof but no sides. And because there wasn't a lot of space on the smaller lots where people kept their horses, we would all go over there and we'd be able to ride in these bigger arenas or go for a trot or a canter around the half-mile track.
Wow, that's very fascinating. And I do appreciate you breaking down the different types of horse riding because, I don't think any of us have quite the clue that there could be so much. That's amazing. Now, I guess what I'm curious about is, when did this kind of hobby that you did with family turn into something more? And maybe even when did you realize, wait, I want this to be part of my life?
Yeah, I rode, as a hobby and as part of the family lifestyle, growing up all the time, from my earliest memories of 3 or 4 or 5 years old all the way up through high school. And I rode through university as well. I went to the University of British Columbia, and I was there for 5 years from 2000 to 2005. And then, after that point, I was kind of in a bit of a holding pattern where I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I could have gone back to school, which was certainly an option I was thinking about, but horses were the other thing in my life that I'd been doing and that I saw a potential way to make a living and make a career out of it. And where I was at, I wouldn't say I was necessarily a big fish in a small pond, but I was a fish in a small pond. And I'd never really experienced a lot really outside of that. I'd never ridden in Europe. I'd never ridden in South America. I'd never gone to work for other professionals other than the people and my parents that were in this small area. And I made the decision that I was going to put off school and put off a career, and I was going to take a year or two, and I was going to travel and work for other people around the world. And when you do that, it's usually called a working student position, which is essentially an internship where a young person will go and trade manual labor, mucking stalls, sweeping, cleaning tack, grooming horses in exchange for riding lessons in order to improve the young person's riding. And so I went and did that for a couple of years. And when I went out and began that journey, my goal was to become a better rider. And when I imagined a better rider, it was somebody that could sit more handsomely on a horse. It was somebody that looked more elegant. It was somebody that was winning major competitions. It was somebody that, had the respect of people and was maybe on a track to go to the Olympics. And that's what I thought of as a good rider. And about halfway through the kind of 2 years that I spent on the road, I got introduced by a few different people. I got introduced to the concept of natural horsemanship, or what a lot of people call horsemanship or horse psychology. And at that point, I started to switch gears slightly, and it drew that world of horsemanship and natural horsemanship really drew me in very quickly and very passionately. And I decided I wanted to learn more about that. And what I started to realize was that being a good horseman and being a good rider are not the same thing. Being a good
Mm.
horseman is about learning how horses think, learning how horses feel, learning how horses learn and play, treating horses with respect, staying one step ahead of problems so that you're not reacting to problems, you're preventing them in the first place. It's treating the horses as your partner rather than as your slave. And it's about having a respect for where we're going as horse people and where we came from. And that thought had never really entered my mind, growing up. It was all about, for me, I was like, I want to be a better rider. I want to be winning. I want to be competing. Once I kind of dove deeper into that world, it just, I started watching clinics. I started reading books. I started buying DVDs. I'd say that was sort of the biggest shift that I've had in my life is when I started to get interested in that part of horses.
Yeah. Do you think that you can be a good rider, or maybe better words, live up to the best expectations of being a good rider without being a good horseman?
Yes, I think you can be a good rider without being a good horseman. I think there's people, for example, I worked for a while in Wellington, which is near West Palm Beach in Florida in the United States. And there's a lot of expensive horses and a lot of money and a lot of affluence in that area. And there'd be people that were young and maybe in their early 20s or even teenagers, and they were young and they were smart and they were motivated. They had a lot of money behind them, and horses weren't something that was all encompassing for them the way that it was for me. It was something that they wanted to do on weekends in between high school or on spring break from college. And so what they would do is they would buy really expensive horses. Sometimes they could be $1 million or more for these horses. And the rider would show up on a private plane for the weekend, and they would show up at the barn, and the horse would already be caught. The horse would already be groomed. The horse would already be tacked up, and the rider would go over and get on a mounting block, never having to look the horse in the eye, and get on that horse and take a riding lesson from one of the best riding instructors in the world. And they would do that, every other weekend during the winter in Wellington, and they would compete in higher and higher level competitions, whether it's dressage or show jumping. And they would get to the point where I would call them very, very talented riders by going through this process, having great instruction and great horses. But they never really had to learn how to catch a horse. They never really had to learn how to start a horse, how to tame a horse, because the horses were so well trained already. They were buying horses that were already trained. They never really had to go a lot deeper into what horse psychology really means. And I think in situations like that, I'd say there's a distinction between being a good rider and being a good horseman.
Yeah. I guess, as you were talking it out, it made sense because I was thinking of watching, say, like the Kentucky Derby. So the rider obviously is the jockey, where the horseman would be the trainer. Is that a fair comparison?
That's the right idea. I think you could have jockeys that are also, I think a jockey could be a good rider and a good horseman, or the jockey could just be a good rider. I think the two can go hand in hand. And same thing with the trainers. I think there's some trainers of thoroughbreds, like we see at the Kentucky Derby, where it purely becomes a numbers game, where it's just the amount of horses they can get in and out. And they train all the horses sort of the same way. And because they've got enough horses coming through their program and enough money, they're going to have some success. I would compare that to maybe when I was at university, I ran track and cross country. I was never super talented, but I enjoyed it. And our coach, the first couple of years, he would have at the beginning of cross country season in late August, early September, he would have about 80 athletes that he was training. And he would train all 80 of us virtually the same way. Similar workouts, similar distance each week. And by the time that track season ended at the, early summer, late spring, we'd have gone from having 80 people to maybe having 8 people. But the 8 people that were left were really, really good. They'd gone through that, they've survived it, and they've gotten really talented. And so he had some athletes that were really doing well, but he lost a lot along the way. And compare that to other coaches that I've had that will tailor the workout for every single athlete, depending on their strengths, their weaknesses, how they're rehabilitating from an injury. And so if you're starting with 6 athletes, but you can keep all 6 and have a moderate amount of success with them, in some ways, that takes more skill than having 80 athletes, giving everybody the same workout and ending with 8 that are doing better.
Yes. That makes total sense. Absolutely. Fascinating. Well, I guess what I'm curious is you've been traveling the world, you've been working, you come to this realization that you want to become a better horseman, not just a rider. So where does life kind of go from that point?
So even though I was interested in this idea of horsemanship and natural horsemanship, in that world, I was still, even though I was passionate about it, I was still very much a beginner and I was learning about it. And so to make a living, I kind of went back to what I knew, which was teaching and riding jumping horses and 3-day eventing horses. Also, what happened about that time, so we're talking about 2010, 2011, about that time frame now, I met Sinead, who's a 3-day event rider, and we started dating, and we'd eventually get married. And she's an American, and she grew up in the southeastern United States and has been a 3-day event rider since she was about 12 years old. And so I made the decision to stay here in the United States with her, which from the perspective of our relationship was great. And it was also great from the perspective of learning about horsemanship, because there's a lot of really talented both riders and horsemen in the eastern part of the United States. And so I really started to learn more and more from these people, both in person, but also, at that time, in sort of 2010 to 2015, or maybe it was just me, I'm not sure, but the live streaming and the streaming content wasn't hugely popular yet. And so I ended up buying a lot of DVDs because I learn well through watching stuff. I don't necessarily have to be doing it to feel like I can learn from it. And so, I'm in my office right now and I look to the side of me and I probably have on the shelf beside me, I probably have, I didn't pay retail for all of them, but if I had paid retail, I probably have, $10,000 worth of horse DVDs next to me. And
Oh, wow.
a lot of those you can get now for obviously much cheaper on like eBay and stuff like that. But, I have a huge collection of these videos that I would watch. And then, going to sleep at night, even with my eyes closed, I would play through some of those moments, some of those scenarios of horse training sort of in my mind's eye with my eyes closed as I fell asleep at night, and really relearning it over and over again. And to the point where I got to imagine the horse could give maybe a different response. And I'd imagine how I'd respond to that and how they would respond to that. And it'd be almost like a chess game that would play out in my mind. And through actually practicing with horses and doing that, I developed more and more skill in that world. When I started to develop my own business and stop being a working student, I was dabbling in both of these worlds, the worlds of natural horsemanship and the world of competitive riding. And I remember very clearly somebody that I really respected came to me and said, "Tik, it's not going to work. You're shooting yourself in the foot by doing this. If you try to live in both worlds, nobody's going to respect you and you're only going to get partially good at both things." They said, "I really recommend you choose one path and you follow it." And thank goodness I did not listen to that person, because I think it's exactly the combination of applying the horsemanship to the competitive world and applying purpose to horsemanship that has made me into the rider and horseman I am today.
Yeah, I love it. I love it so much. I'm curious, just based on what you were saying when you were talking about the way in which you love to learn through the videos that you watch. And then when you were talking about laying in bed at night, eyes closed, and just imagining it, putting yourself in it and feeling the horse and putting yourself in that situation. When you're on the horse and you're actually riding, what is it that you are paying attention to the most? Is it visual? Is it muscle memory of exactly how to do? Are you paying attention to the reaction of the horse in that moment? Like, what is it that you really tune into when you're in the moment on the horse doing the thing?
That's a great question, Kevin. I love that. So first of all, I'll back up and I'll say for somebody that's new to riding, what they're usually concentrating on is simply can they stay on the horse? Can they keep their balance? Are their eyes up? Are their heels down? Are they holding the reins the right way? And they're just kind of, it's a very sort of surface level of just trying to like survive that moment and stick with the horse. For me, I've been, around and on my horses my whole life. So the idea of just staying on them is something that's become pretty much, except in very extreme situations, pretty much second nature for me, something that I don't have to think about. And now, depending on the horse I'm on, I'm thinking about one of two things. With a horse that is young, with a horse that is going through something difficult, with a horse that's emotional or nervous or anxious or tense or scared, with that kind of horse, mainly what I'm aware of is where their mind is at. Is the horse thoughtful? Is the horse relaxed? Or the opposite of that, is the horse tense or scared? And the way that I can tell that is I can, you can be on a horse and you can almost feel their heart rate through the saddle as it starts to rev up. A horse will get quicker and more abrupt as they get anxious. A horse will raise their head and tense their neck if they get anxious. A horse will stop suddenly or move quickly when they're anxious. A horse will breathe differently, often with more noise or whinny or call when they're anxious. The first step with those kinds of horses is I'm really just trying to set up situations so the horse can become more relaxed and thoughtful and essentially become a good student. If you think about somebody that's learning something that they can, they're sitting quietly, they're paying attention, they're not constantly getting distracted with their fingers or their eyes or their ears or looking away or leaving the room, but they've got sort of a calm attention as they're trying to take it in. And that's what I want the horse to be. I want the horse, first of all, to feel like they're relaxed and they can be a good partner and a good student. With a horse that already has that mindset, what I would call a more mature horse or a horse I've got a better relationship with, and that sort of being a good student is almost not totally taken for granted. You never take it for granted and forget about that. But for a horse where all that emotional stuff is easier for them, then I start to be very aware of the horse's movement. Is the horse speeding up? Is the horse slowing down? Is the horse in a good balance? When we talk about a horse's balance, that's one of the most important concepts to be aware of when you're riding. And it's also a very subtle one. If you think about a person that is, imagine you're on ice in the middle of winter, maybe not in Florida, but somewhere where there's ice in the winter, and you're on the stairs and you start to feel like you're starting to lose your balance and you want to put your arms out to the side and you're nervous and you don't want to move quickly and you're in you feel like out of balance. Horses oftentimes, because they're reacting out of fear or because they have a person on their back or something's happened unexpectedly, horses oftentimes find themselves slightly out of balance. And the more we can help them find a good balance, the more they start to appreciate us and rely on us and listen to us. And so one of the jobs of a more advanced rider is constantly to set up situations and to help that horse be in a good balance.
Fascinating. How much does the horse react based on the energy of the rider? Because I wonder if the rider is nervous, if they're scared, or they just have some bad juju. I would imagine that relates to the horse. Is that true?
Yeah, the vast majority of the time, that is absolutely true. That the horse is going to pick up on a person being nervous and they're going to become more nervous. I'd say, just to throw out a number, I'd say 80% of the time that's true. But then you also have maybe 10% on either end of that spectrum. You have 10% of horses that are so emotionally balanced, so emotionally fit, so relaxed that even if the person is anxious, it's not going to affect the horse very much. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you can have horses that are so distracted. Maybe they're worried about a tractor pulling in. Maybe they're calling to their friend in the barn and they're so distracted that you could be nervous, but they're not even paying any attention to you. So it doesn't matter if you get nervous because they're not paying any attention to you anyway.
Yes, that's hysterical. So before we kind of keep moving on in the story, the other kind of question that I would love to ask you about is it just maybe because you grew up around horses starting as a child? Does it make you where you're not scared of them? Because I mean, for somebody who's never been around a horse in person, they are big animals. And I think of them being almost intimidating and scared of what they are going to do. And I've just wondered how that is for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Horses, you know, every year there's very, very talented riders. There's very, very experienced horse people that get hurt or even killed. Horses weigh a lot. They're very quick. They're very strong. They can move almost without any warning at all. And horses, are flight animals. Their first response to fear is usually to move quickly. And so it's very easy to get caught up in the wrong place at the wrong time. The major skill to have if you want to stay safe around horses is to get good at reading horses. And what reading horses well allows you to do is stay one step ahead of trouble. To the point now where I'm practicing that skill constantly. If I see a group of horses in a field and they're trotting forward and they're trotting towards me, I'll try to predict the moment where they're going to stop, or predict the moment where they're going to turn their heads, or predict the moment where one horse is going to fall in behind the other horse. Every horse is unique and has its own character and personality, but also every horse is a horse. Every horse has similar behaviors and similar motivations. And so with enough practice of sort of predicting what's going to happen next, it gets easier and easier. Or I guess your percentage of the time that you're right goes up higher and higher. So the more that you get to know horses in general, and the more that you get to know horses in particular, the easier it is to keep yourself in a safe situation. There's a lot of ways that I now know how to, if I'm not sure how something's going to play out, if I'm not sure what the horse is going to do, I just stay further away from them. I don't go right up into that horse's space or have that horse come up into my space. And when I talk about space, it's almost like this bubble around me that's about 3 feet around me, or the horse's bubble, which is 5 or 6 feet around them. And I don't go into their space or have them come into my space until we're both relaxed and thoughtful. A lot of times people come to me and their complaint is that the horse doesn't respect their boundaries or respect their space. And on the other hand, when the horse is relaxed, they want to cuddle on their horse and kiss their horse and give their horse cookies. And so usually what I teach them is about having 3 boundaries at different distances. So the first boundary is at about 6 feet away. And that's with a horse that you don't know, or a horse that's really, really emotional or really dangerous, that we don't get within 6 feet of each other. My second boundary is at arm's length. So if I were to reach out my arm fully extended with my fingers fully extended, and the horse were able to stretch out its neck and its nose, that we couldn't touch each other. So from my body to that horse's nose is 2 feet, the length of my arm, more or less. And that's for a horse that is, that we know a little bit better, that's not dangerous. That's just sort of a run-of-the-mill kind of easy boundary that I keep pretty consistent. And the third boundary is with a horse that can come right up in with its muzzle, with its whiskers, with its mouth, and could actually touch me on my shoulder or forearm or chest. And for a horse to come that close to me, I want to feel like those 4 criteria are totally met, which means I'm relaxed and thinking about the horse, and the horse is relaxed and thinking about me. And if any of those 4 things are not met, it's like right away back out to 2 feet or back out to 6 feet away from me.
Wow, I love it. It's like a relationship. It's like a dance. You show me respect, I'll show you respect.
Yeah, it's a relationship or a dance is actually one of the best ways to think about horsemanship. Just like in a relationship, you want a horse to want to be with you, but you don't want them to be running over top of you, and you don't want them to need to be with you. You want them to want to be with you.
Yes. I love it. Fascinating. Kind of going back to this timeline of events, and I'm going to allow you to fill in gaps, but I know a big part of your story is more recent in like 2023. But before we get there, is there anything that happened in between that you feel like really led to that monumental moment in your career?
So what we're working towards here in this conversation, I think, Kevin, is Road to the Horse, which I was invited to compete at 2023. The first time I heard about Road to the Horse was in 2012. And I guess that was a fairly pivotal moment. It'd be for somebody that ends up being a chess player and it's the first time that they play chess and they're drawn in, Watching Road to the Horse in 2012 for the first time, I didn't watch it live. I watched it on DVD. But it was a moment where I saw these guys competing, and it's a colt starting competition, which means they're starting horses in front of a crowd. These are completely untamed, almost wild horses that they're starting. I watched that competition, and even though I didn't fully 100% to commit to being a colt starter, it was something that I started to follow more and more closely every year. And it was something where I thought, hey, maybe if I get a little bit better at starting horses, if I get a little bit better at horsemanship, maybe this is something I could do one day.
Yeah. Fascinating. Now, I know when I spoke with you before, and I would love for you to share it with me now for the audience sake, is when we talk about colt starting, I believe is the term. I had asked you, how does that kind of relate to, I've heard the term of like breaking a horse?
Breaking a horse and starting a horse is, to the everyday person, it's the same thing, really, which is we're taking a horse and we're getting them used to humans and the human world and being ridden. If you want to go a little bit deeper into the word of breaking and starting, breaking a little bit more implies breaking their spirit, breaking that wildness out of them. Whereas starting, I think, it's a smoother word. It's a nicer word. It speaks to me more about having a relationship and a partnership rather than having a slave. And I like the word starting. I'm around some people that can use the word breaking, and I think they just use that word because it's the word they've used their whole life. And I don't think they mean anything bad by it. So, if I'm speaking to somebody and they say they broke their horse, and I kind of know what they meant, then I'm fine with that. It's not like I'd give them a hard time about it. And then in the competition, we talk about colt starting. And a colt is a young male horse. An older male horse that is fully intact is called a stallion. And an older male horse that has been gelded is called a gelding. And then a female horse is called a mare. And a young female horse is called a filly. When we talk about colt starting, we're really talking about starting any kind of those 5 kinds of horses, whether it's an older horse or a younger horse or a mare or a gelding or a stallion. We call all of those things colt starting. And I'm not really sure why. I guess it's just kind of maybe sounds better than saying horse starting.
Yeah. No, I love it. Now, with those different horses that you just listed off, does the approach change based on what category that horse falls in? Or is it all the same?
Really, the approach changes slightly for every single horse. Out of the categories of older, younger, male, female, I don't think it necessarily changes significantly enough that it's kind of worth going into that. But, when we talk about training a horse, it's really every horse is unique. And so we develop a set of skills that we can start to apply generally to every horse, but we're really tailoring that starting experience for each horse individually. And the better I get at it, at starting and reading a horse, the more I can start to have different sort of tools in the toolbox that I can use, or I can go on that particular horse's timeline. In a lot of ways, they're as unique as people. Like if you had a group of kids and you're trying to teach them all exactly the same way, you're going to always have some that need to go slower or some that are feeling like they could go faster.
Yeah. Again, I go back to that the relationship. Every relationship we have in our life is different. Every person is different. And so if we look at it in this regard, comparing it to that, why would you think it wouldn't be the same as that? That's beautiful. We spoke about Road to the Horse. Talk to me about what that is.
It was first started in 2003 by a lady in Texas named Tootie Bland. And the idea that she had was that in most horse disciplines, we have competitions. We have the Grand Prix of show jumping, the Grand Prix of dressage. We have the World Cups and the World Cup final for show jumping. We have the Olympics for 3-day eventing. For thoroughbred racing, you have the Kentucky Derby. For endurance in the United States, you have the Tevis Cup. For all these different horse disciplines, you have a competition and you have a way to sort of get the crowds interested and celebrate achievement and encourage people to keep striving for excellence. And in the world of starting horses, there hadn't really been much like that, much in terms of getting everybody together in one place and kind of showing off that particular skill set. Starting horses was really thought of almost more as like a trade. Like, it'd be rare to get a bunch of carpenters or plumbers together and say, let's have a competition and celebrate how great you are, and that it's not just a trade, but it's actually an art. And you can be, just like being a carpenter or a plumber, you could have somebody that's a good carpenter, an average carpenter, a bad carpenter. You could have somebody that's an amazing carpenter and almost takes it to an art form. And so it's the same with colt starting. So this lady, she had the idea. She said, what if we took some of the best colt starters and we gave everybody a horse and we drew a crowd in and we videoed it and we had prize money and we celebrated the trade and art of colt starting. And since then, it's grown almost every year. And now they have it at the Kentucky Horse Park in Lexington, Kentucky. It's by invitation only. So you can't just sign up and go. They really do their research to make sure they're inviting people that are both talented colt starters and they have the ability to work in front of a crowd, in front of an audience, and to speak about what they're doing. And each year it's only 3 or 4 people that are competing. So it's not like there's 100 people or 10 people. It's really 3 or 4 people that are in a stadium, sort of about the size of a hockey arena. And there's, 8 or 10,000 people watching, filling up most of the arena. And then they've got cameras that are live streaming it around the world. Each of the 3 or 4 people gets assigned. Well, you don't get assigned. You get to pick a horse. They bring 10 horses from Texas, and they're all 3-year-old gelding quarter horses. And out of the 10, each of the 4 competitors gets to pick one. So then you're paired with a horse. And over the course of 3 days, a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday in March each year, we start the horse. Like, everything is live. Everything is in front of the crowd. There's nothing behind the scenes. Every single moment that the competitors are interacting with that horse is in front of a live audience.
Wow. That sounds rather stressful to be in front of a live audience when doing something like that.
Yeah, I mean, most time when people are starting horses, they're doing it at their barn or maybe with a few people watching, and they can go get water when they want to, or a break when they want to, or spend 2 weeks doing it if they want to, or 2 months or 2 years doing it. There's no timeline, and they can switch arenas or switch spaces or have somebody else help them. And when we talk about people getting a horse ready for a Grand Prix or the Kentucky Derby or any other kind of horse competition, all the training goes on behind the scenes, which means the horse is being trained at home in the arena or the racetrack at home, away from people, watching. Whereas this is a really unique event in that every single second that we're training those horses is in front of, tens of thousands of people and 5 judges that are watching you every single second.
Wow. Okay. So I have more questions about the event, but before we get to those questions, talk to me about you actually being invited to do this. How did that even happen?
So after I'd watched it in 2012 and I kind of had it on my radar and I was starting to practice a little bit more starting horses, then I made a point to kind of figure out a little bit more about the competition. Who do they invite? What skills do they have? How could I meet some of those people? How could I make friends with some of the past competitors? How could I get a little bit more involved in that community? And so that's something that I didn't drop everything and chase that, but I was just always a little bit aware, as I went about my schedule, if there was an opportunity to, say, teach a clinic in Texas versus teach a clinic in Connecticut, and the one in Texas was going to be near, where some of the people that organize Road to the Horse are, is I'm going to go to the one in Texas because maybe I'll get a chance to meet them. So I'm kind of have it on my radar from 2012 on. And then in 2023, I went up there and I was asked not to compete, but I was asked to do a demonstration of how I work with horses. And so I was kind of like like an intermission type act, where people are there for the main event, but I got to spend half an hour just talking to the crowd and showing a little bit what I do. And so that was in March of 2023. And then in June of 2023, so a few months later, the organizer of Road to the Horse called me up. She said, Tik, are you interested in competing next year? And this is something I'd thought about for years. And I was like a little bit caught off guard by the phone call, but also a little bit excited, and my adrenaline was going. And I said, yeah, I definitely want to do it. And she said, well, don't respond so quickly. Talk to your family, talk to your wife, and think about it, and then call me back in a day or two and give me your answer. And so I went to speak with Sinead that night, and I said, Sinead, they invited me to do this. What do you think? And she said, absolutely, you should do this. This is something that you've been wanting to do. She said, why wouldn't you do it? Actually, Sinead, there's a lot of reasons why somebody would say no to this and not do it. And so then I proceeded to kind of list all the reasons why somebody might not do it. And I mean, there was like a lot of reasons, First of all, you're doing something that is really difficult on a timeline in front of a crowd. So there's a lot of opportunity to sort of embarrass yourself or to have something taken out of context that gets put on social media. There's also, in the horse world, there's also the ethical questions of, should starting horses even be a competition? Should starting horses even be on a timeline? I mean, you go far enough down that road and there's people that are like, should we even be riding horses or keeping horses as pets? Like, what are the ethical ramifications of that? And there's people that are ready to jump on you no matter what you do. And so there's those questions. And then in terms of starting horses themselves, there's certain parts of it that I was really worried about. I was worried about, what if I can't even catch this horse? I was worried about, am I going to even be able to get a saddle on this horse? I was worried about, what about the first ride? What if I get bucked off? What if I get hurt? Every year somewhere, somebody's starting a horse and they get seriously injured. And then there's also the question of, by the time I get to the third day of this, am I going to have a horse that still feels like a willing partner, or are they going to start to feel like they're shut down and overfaced? On top of that, there were a couple people in my life that I really respected and admired. My dad actually being one of them, that when I asked them if I thought I should do it, they said no. They said they thought it can be a little tough on the horses, and that it was going to be a little overfacing for me. There were other things I could do. So I explained all that to Sinead, and we talked about it. And basically, we made the decision together that it was something that, despite all these fears and all these nerves I had about it, it was going to be something that I was going to choose to do anyway. And that I wasn't going to let fear stand in the way of stopping me from something that I not only thought I could do, but that I thought I could do my way, not anybody else's way, but I thought I could do it the way that I wanted to do it. And that it was something that if I didn't do it, I would look back, 10 or 20 years from now, and that I would regret saying no to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. The way in my head I'm comparing this is you have a football player, a guy who's good, but all of a sudden gets a call like, hey, you have the opportunity to play quarterback in the Super Bowl. And all I can think is, of course it's been a dream for that football player to play in the Super Bowl. And yet, what if it doesn't go good? What if I screw up? Here I am on the center stage. All of a sudden, I'm being handed my dream, but is it worth it? All those fears and worries and the what if scenarios, I think a lot of times rob people of ever actually fulfilling a dream. So I guess want to say applause to you for the fact of going ahead and giving it a shot.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was not an easy decision, and I think you're absolutely right in that the fear of what's going to happen, or even the people that are closest to us, that love us, that want to protect us from being hurt, those things can stop us from achieving the things we really want to do, our dreams.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So at this point, we're basically looking at roughly almost a year until you would be competing. Is that right?
Yeah. So I got the invitation, I think June, and then the competition was going to be in March of the next year. So I had about 9 months in which to get ready.
Okay. Amazing. Now, before we actually fast forward all that time and we get to the competition, obviously, I'm assuming training like crazy, doing whatever, which I want you to explain. But I believe at this point is also when you have the idea to turn this into a book, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So right from that first invitation to compete, I wrote a book that was published in 2018 about sort of getting started in the horse world. And so for the last 7 years, from 2018 until now, or I guess until 2023, I'd been wanting to write another book, and I wasn't quite sure, what I was going to write about or when that opportunity was going to come along. And then I got this invitation to do Road to the Horse, and I just thought, this is it. This is the thing, that if I take notes on my preparation and take notes throughout the competition, I can turn this experience into a book, and I can share with people what I went through as I prepared for it. And I pitched that idea to my wife and also to the publishers, Trafalgar Square Books, and they were all on board with it. So I started taking notes immediately. I'm not the kind of person that journals every day or anything like that, but when I've got a project that's important to me, I'll take notes on that particular thing or that time in my life. And so for the next 9 months, I took notes almost every day on what I was doing to get ready.
Wow. What I think is so cool about this is because so many times people write the book after the thing has already happened. They go back and they tell the story, yet you literally got to have this brilliant insight that this needed to be told in a book. And got to basically start writing it as you were living it out, which I think is just fascinating.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it was kind of really fortunate in how it worked out. And as a reader, I read a lot, and I like books that give sort of an immediacy or kind of a presence to the reader. They feel like they're brought in right into that moment and almost living it with the author. And I think it's a little harder to do that when you're looking back at something that happened and you didn't have detailed notes about it. You forget exactly how the conversation with somebody went, or you forget, the place that you traveled, or you forget what your office looked like, or you forget how your horse acted that day. But when you're taking notes on it, every day and throughout the day, you can really sort of place the reader right in that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. Now, one thing that I want to ask you about before we actually get to the competition is the mindset that you went into for preparing and going into this competition, because I am going to think in my head that you're probably going up against what I think of just like cowboys, like guys out there. And you don't strike me as quite the cowboy spitting tobacco, doing all the stuff. And I know that you decided at some point to do this your way.
Yeah, Kevin, you're that's hilarious that you said that. That's so true. Since this competition began in 2003, I'm only the second non sort of Western rider, non-cowboy to do this.
Wow.
If you think about 3 or 4 people every year, and I'm only the second person to do it, you're absolutely right. The vast majority of people are sort of wearing Wranglers, cowboy boots, cowboy hat. Maybe they have like a knife in a sheath on their belt. They got like deerskin gloves. They got the chaps with the fringe. They got a cowboy saddle. Yeah, maybe they got chewing tobacco. I don't know, but there's some version of that. Whereas the kind of riding that I've done my whole life is not quite so like cool or masculine. I grew up and I still ride with the tall black boots, the tight pants, the helmet. We're perched a little bit more atop our high horse, so to speak. And it's got a very different vibe to it than the quarter horses in Texas with the cowboys. So yeah, that was the first kind of obstacle that I had to think about in terms of my preparation is, am I going to try to start this horse as a cowboy? Meaning, am I going to wear jeans and cowboy boots and a cowboy hat and use a Western saddle and kind of throw out everything I've done and learn a whole new way of doing it? Or am I going to do it in an English saddle and tight pants? Or am I going to try to find some way to be in the middle between those two worlds. So that was the first kind of question that I had.
And for you, what finally led you to the answer?
So what I decided to do, what inspired me to do this is a book I read called Work Hard, Be Nice, or maybe it's Work Hard, Be Kind. And it's about these elementary school teachers that start their own charter school program called KIPP, K-I-P-P. And it's short, KIPP is short for the Knowledge is Power program. And they developed a very unique way of teaching kids, these two teachers that started the KIPP program. And when it started to expand beyond these two teachers and they started to have multiple schools and other instructors and then dozens and then hundreds of other instructors, what they did initially is these two teachers that started the program, they were really successful. And all these kids that they were helping, a lot of them came from sort of troubled backgrounds or less affluent areas. And they were helping these kids achieve amazing successes and go on to graduate from high school and go to college and stuff like that. So what they started to do is they started to teach other people how to teach their way. And what they realized fairly quickly within a couple of years is that it wasn't working. And the reason it wasn't working is that every teacher actually has their own superpower for teaching kids. Some teachers will sing stuff. Some teachers will make up poems. Some teachers like telling stories. Some teachers relate to the kids through drama or art. Some teachers are more physical and they're all about the high fives or the hugs. Some teachers are quiet and just have a presence that the kids want to watch. Some teachers are about sports and they, are outside playing with the kids at recess. And what they found was that they couldn't just teach all teachers to be the same and sort of follow the exact same way of teaching, but they had to allow teachers to bring out their own kind of unique, special way of teaching. And I think it's the same thing in the horse world. And so that was my plan in my preparation, is that I was going to spend 8 months learning from as many talented animal trainers and horse trainers. I even did a chicken training camp where I learned how to train chickens as part of my preparation. But I can tell you more about that.
Okay.
I can tell you more about that after. But basically my plan was I was going to spend 8 months learning as much as I can from other people. And then in the last month, I was going to go back to incorporating the things that I wanted, letting go of the things that I didn't want, and trying to go back and spend the last month going back to being as authentic as I could and the very best version of myself that I could be. And so I wasn't feel like I was trying to imitate somebody or force a way of being, but I could start that horse in the way that felt the most smooth and comfortable to me.
Wow. I love that. And so when the competition came, you showed up as your true authentic self.
I showed up a little bit in the middle. I used a Western saddle. I ended up wearing jeans and cowboy boots, but I didn't wear a belt buckle. I wore a normal belt. I wore a helmet. I had my sleeves a little bit partially rolled up, and I used slightly different tools on the ground than some of the other guys. And I was kind of, I definitely stood out just by having the helmet, for example, but also by, a lot of times I'm not used to wearing cowboy boots. So a lot of times in between I would trade and I'd put on my Hoka running shoes or something like that. And so I definitely stood out as being somebody that was a little bit the underdog and a little bit different than the other competitors that first year. It's something that I was prepared for and it didn't bother me. I think if I hadn't had the mindset right from the beginning of how I was going to do that, I think I would have tried to force it a little bit and tried to look a little bit more like everybody else and maybe wear a cowboy hat. But I was like, I'm just going to be me and I'm going to try to be the best version of myself.
Isn't it funny? It doesn't matter who we are, how old we are. There is still that internal battle like we were in middle school of fitting in with the crowd or being who we want to be.
Exactly.
It never leaves.
No, exactly. You're exactly right. You're exactly right.
Yeah. So talk to me about the actual competition as far as how did it go in general? And then was it as hard as you thought? Was it easier than you imagined? I'm curious to know how it went.
Yeah. In some ways it was more difficult and in some ways it was easier. The tension was very high for me throughout the whole, I got there a day early. So I essentially had, almost 2 days early, actually. So I essentially had 4 or 5 days at the Kentucky Horse Park where I was always a little bit on edge, the way that you might be if you're about to sort of take a big test or propose to somebody or something. Like, I was just always on edge. I could never really settle. I didn't sleep very well. I didn't eat very well. There's a constantly things like judges meetings, meeting the press, meeting the crowds of people. I had a lot of family and friends that flew in, so I tried to put a little time with them. Meanwhile, I also am there with my wife and our two little kids. So I've got, a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old that, I'm spending the evenings and mornings with. And it was just like, from that perspective, it was really, really, really challenging. One of the guys that I talked to before I competed, a guy that had competed the year before, his name is Mike Major, and he actually had won the year before. So in 2023, he had won. I sort of got caught in an aisle with him the day before it began. And he looked at me and he could probably see that I was a little stressed. And he said, Tik, this is all the hard part. The interviews, the crowds, the judges meetings, making time for family and friends. This is all the hard part. Once you actually get into the round pen with the horse, it gets easier. And he goes, in fact, you don't even need to think. All you have to do is just do what the horse tells you to do. And from that perspective, he was absolutely right. The easiest time was almost in the round pen when I was with the horse. I was so prepared and I was so focused that I really can honestly say that the 4 hours over 3 days, an hour and a half Friday, an hour and a half Saturday, and an hour Sunday, those 4 hours, I've never had 4 other hours in my entire life, at least in that short amount of time, where I was so present. I mean, maybe not since I was a kid. Like, little kids are present, but as adults, we tend to often think into the past or into the future, or we're checking our phone or we get distracted. But those 4 hours, I was so in the moment with that horse in the round pen. It just flowed. It's like when we talk about an athlete getting into the zone or the flow state or the place where time slows down. That's what it was like for me. And so from that perspective, it was easier than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I love it. Wow, that's so amazingly powerful. Now, from the judge's perspective, what did you do differently or better than the other competitors to have you ultimately win?
Because we were all competing at the same time, on Friday and Saturday, there's 4 round pens set up. So there's an hour and a half each day, and all 4 of us are training the horses at the same time. So the judges, there's 5 judges, and they're standing sort of in the middle of this square of round pens. And so they look at one for a few minutes, then the other, and there's 5 judges. And so they're all walking around observing what the 4 athletes and 4 horses are doing. And then on the Sunday, we go in reverse order of go, which means if you're in first place, you go last. And if you're in last place, you go first. And you're not allowed to watch the other competitors that go before you. So on Sunday, I was sitting in first place and I was last to go. So I couldn't watch the other 3 people. And I went out there and I competed on Sunday without having seen them. So, it's hard for me to really compare myself to them. I will say that one of the things I think I did very well is I became very aware in my preparation of tiny improvements, of looking to improve stuff 1% at a time, and then leave that skill or leave that area of the round pen or leave that obstacle and go and do something else, and then make it 1% better, and then go and do something else and make it 1% better, and then go and do something else and make it 1% better. So I'm always have 3 or 4 things that I'm alternating between, and I'm trying to never get into a fight with my horse. I'm trying to never push something so far that he gets stressed out. And I'm just trying to constantly, like nonstop, every 30 seconds, make a little improvement and then leave it. And, hopefully that's what the judges saw. And I guess they liked it because, that I've now done it twice, 2024 and 2025, and I've won it both years. So that technique has been paying off for me and hopefully paying off for the horses.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. The fact that you even got to be invited to this competition, you win it, you come back, you win it again. I mean, that is just absolutely remarkable. What I guess I would love to know is when you're in this competition, you only have 3 days with this horse. Is there a point when you're working with the horse that you feel like I'm going to succeed? Like me and this horse have made some type of connection, or could that even happen in such a short amount of time?
Yeah, definitely. With every horse, it happens at a different time. And with me, with that horse, that first year, it happened about maybe 12 or 13 minutes in on the first day.
Say what?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. At the first 10 minutes, I couldn't catch the horse, and the horse was at the edge of the round pen, and its head was high, and it was calling to the other horses. And I was just trying to get close to it where I could touch it or I could catch it, or he would get interested in me or curious about me. And I was a little worried. I was a lot worried. I was like, am I going to have to rope this horse, like swing a lariat over its head? Am I going to be able to touch it? Am I going to spend the next hour and a half here just like not being able to catch it? Like, what's going to happen? And somewhere, in there, maybe 12 or 13 minutes in, the horse started to look at me, and then he started to take a step towards me. And then he started to put his nose towards my hand with some curiosity. And once I had that, even though it was just a little bit in terms of how much you have to accomplish in 3 days, once I had that, I just knew as long as I didn't mess it up, like it was going to happen. I didn't know the timeline it was going to happen on. I didn't know if I was going to win or not. I didn't, those things are out of my control. But as soon as I kind of had that thoughtfulness and that curiosity, and I felt like the horse, a lot of horses, even horses that have been around people a long time, a lot of them they'll be around people and they'll look past the person, or they'll look through the person, or they'll be distracted. But once I kind of had that happen, I just had like sort of this special kind of feeling go through me, where you almost kind of like get goosebumps, and you're just like, this is going to happen.
Yeah. Wow. So you win it. You succeed at it. What makes you come back to do it again the next year?
Yeah. So, the first year when I was invited, it was a much bigger conversation, like I said, with my wife and with my dad and with some of the people close to me. And I will say that my dad, who had initially said no, he came and he watched, and he ended up being possibly my biggest supporter. So that was amazing to see. David O'Connor, a mentor of mine that initially thought maybe I shouldn't do it. He actually was, he's an Olympic gold medalist in 3-day eventing, and they actually invited him to come be a judge. And so he actually went and judged it one year as well. So some of these people sort of came around and ended up being very supportive in the end. But the biggest thing that people said to me as I was getting ready for that first year was things like, don't worry if you don't win, just do right by the horse. Or don't worry if you can't even catch your horse, just take it slow. Or if you've got to just retire after 2 days and you don't want to do the third day, that's fine. Or just these sort of things like, no matter what happens, it'll be fine. And you can always quit early, and don't worry about the results. Those were all the comments the first year. And the second year, all the comments I got were, are you going to defend your title? Are you going to win again?
That's funny.
And so it's two very different kinds of pressure. One is the pressure that the underdog faces, that is, he's a little overfaced and he's going in for a big challenge. And the second kind of pressure is the pressure of the returning winner. Both those pressures kind of come with their own unique challenges. I definitely was aware of that. And I thought, going back a second year would be a challenge in itself. I still wanted to share with the people watching my way of doing things. And at that point that I got invited, I made the goal that I was going to get the book finished, edited, and printed and shipped so that we could release it exactly 1 year later at Road to the Horse 2025. And so for that whole year after 2024, that whole year of getting ready for the second time, I was both preparing for the competition as well as actually taking all my notes from the book and writing it into the book, which people can now buy today.
Yeah. Wow. That's just incredible, man. That is absolutely incredible. How has life for you personally, professionally, how has it changed since achieving this long time goal of even being invited to compete, much less winning it 2 years in a row? What has that done for life?
On the level of how does it affect my everyday life, just like what I do or my job, it really hasn't affected it that much. I haven't had a bunch of new sponsors come in, to sponsor myself or the business that I run with my wife, Sinead, or anything like that. I'd say the biggest way it's changed me is that it was something that was so difficult and I faced so much pressure and adversity going through. And then I came out of it. Not only did I come out of it alive on the other side, but I came out of it having learned a lot, having made new friends, having won. And I came out of it on the other side of it sort of successfully. And it really changed kind of my confidence level and in my feeling okay being who I am and being my authentic self. And I thought, to do this, I don't have to be a cowboy. I don't have to change who I am. I can be exactly who I am. I can write the way that I want to write. I can start a horse the way that I want to start a horse. And I don't have to change that for anybody.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Absolutely love it. Now the book that you've published, who do you hope reads the book?
3 million people.
Yes. I love that answer.
When you sell books, it's an interesting thing. Not everybody is a reader, and some people obviously don't have the patience to read, or some people don't read at all. Some people prefer audiobooks. Some people prefer, reading the hard copy of the book or whatever. When you look at book sales, there's a big difference between a book that can sell 2,000 copies versus 20,000 copies versus 200,000 copies versus 2 million copies. And all those jumps are pretty difficult leaps to make. And my main goal in writing the book is not about who's going to read it, other than I hope my family and one day my kids will read it. This book I almost kind of wrote to remember this part of my life. And I at the beginning, I think I even say in the beginning, like in the acknowledgments or something like that, I said, not many kids get to go back and read on a level like this what their mother or what their father did and thought and felt when they were younger. Like we often know our parents the way that they are now, and to really get into your parents' mind when they were in their 20s or 30s or 40s, I think is a pretty unique thing. So when I wrote this, I really kind of, I guess, had my kids they don't know how to read yet, but I really kind of had them in mind as sort of an audience that I was writing to. But aside from that, I mean, the two main goals I had when I was writing it for myself were, number one is I want to improve my writing. So I studied a lot about writing, reading books on how to write, working closely with an editor who would offer me advice on how to bring out the storyline or the plot or bring out characters or make chapters more interesting. And then also the other thing that was really helpful is by taking all my notes and making it into a book in that year that I was getting ready to compete a second time, it really clarified a lot of the thoughts that I had in getting ready for it the first time. So it's really like I almost lived that twice, because once I lived it in person and I lived it a second time as I took the notes and made it into a book. And so it really helped me kind of improve my cold starting for the second year just in writing the book.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. What I can't help but think is, for any of us who we have a goal, we have a dream, sometimes we want to know how other people did it. You documented the whole thing in this book. And I can't help but think what a source of inspiration, no matter whether you're somebody interested in horses or it's a kid dreaming of playing in the Super Bowl, or if it's any type of big dream or goal you have. It's always really cool sometimes to see how others did it. And so when I think of this book, it's kind of a roadmap to how you made this dream come true.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly what it is. It's a roadmap. And I think by studying other people's roadmaps, I don't think we have to follow them exactly or imitate them, but I think it can inspire us and give us ideas for our own personal roadmap.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Tik, man, I have enjoyed getting to talk with you today. I've enjoyed getting to hear your personal story, this professional journey. For somebody who wants to pick up this book for themselves, where is the best place for us to send them? And I'll be sure that links are in the show notes for easy access.
So in the United States, the best place is from Trafalgar Square Books. In the UK, it's from Quiller Books. of course, if you have a local tack shop or a local bookstore, then I definitely would encourage you to support that sort of brick and mortar store and the person that's running that local bookstore. And of course, last of all, for those of you that are not feeling motivated enough to do any of those things, just go to Amazon.
Okay. When in doubt, just go to Amazon.
That's
I love
right.
it.
That's right.
I love it. Well, I will be sure that links are in the show notes, as I said, for all of the options to make it very easy for the person who wants to take our conversation to the next level and dive into your book. Tik, once again, man, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I thank you in the most sincere way possible for being here.
Well, Kevin, it's truly been an honor. And, this show has been a lot about me and what I've done. And if anybody's listening to this podcast for the first time, I would really encourage you to go and listen to a little bit of Kevin's story, because I was lucky enough to hear some of that from him when we spoke on the phone the other day. And it's truly an inspiring, remarkable story, Kevin, that you have. And I really appreciate you having me on your show. So thank you.
Oh, man. Well, I appreciate that so much. That means a lot to me. And I thank you so much for saying it. For you listening today, my hope, as always, is that something said today can maybe be that little bit of spark of inspiration, of motivation for you to maybe dust off that dream that you've been thinking about. Maybe there's a goal that others have told you it's too big, it's not for you, but there's a part of you that knows that you're made for it, you're meant for it. So my friend, get out there and chase it. It's all about chasing after the goal, embarking on this journey of life, because at the end of the day, all we're going to have are the regrets, the things that we didn't do. Just go out there and start living life to the best of your ability. My name is Kevin Lowe, and this, of course, was another episode of Grit, Grace, and Inspiration.
I got grit, grace, and inspiration